Hi everybody, it's Carmen Alana Tibbetts here in the Agogia Art Studio, and it is time to announce the final 10 selections for the plants of 2021. So I had a variety of suggestions, and I guess not surprisingly, many of them were the same. So what I decided to do is, instead of focusing on one species within each of the groups, I'm just going to go for the general sort of thing for those. So I have to put on my glasses here. So lots and lots of people said opuntia, which is prickly pear. So that's going to be one of the selections, and I'm just going to go for general prickly pear. The other one, closely related, is cylindropuntia, which is cholla. And a lot of people had favorite chollas, but I'm just going to go for one general sort of cholla. Not surprisingly, a lot of people said agave. So again, I'm just going to go for the general agave. So that is the first three: opuntia, cylindropuntia, and agave. Next, I had a few people suggest salvias, and that's an interesting one because there are a lot of old world salvias and a lot of new world salvias, and Mexico is actually the center of diversity for salvia. So I'm just going to go for a general salvia there instead of trying for a particular species, because there are so many and they are all very beautiful and very interesting. Oaks. I had a suggestion for a variety of oaks, and again, Mexico is a center of diversity for oaks. So I'm just going to go for like the general quercus. And the thing about desert oaks is they tend to be a little more shrubby and less defined in form than the mighty oak tree that you might be thinking of in the rest of North America. So that will be kind of an interesting challenge. The other thing with oaks in the Southwest is they're kind of famous for hybridizing. So if you look at one oak, you say, oh, well, that's Quercus, da 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 da. And then you look at one over here and you're like, which one is that? And then you look at one over here and it looks like they're in between. And it's like, it's an interesting thing. So oaks are a good choice. There's a lot of them. They're very tough and they have an interesting growth form. So that will be a good challenge. I had a suggestion for chiltepin, which is the native, tiny, tiny, super hot chili that you see in Sonora. So that's a good one. We'll be doing chiltepin, which is native chili, and some people think that it's one of the original chilies. We can talk about that when we're doing that plant. Somebody suggested Amsonia kearniana, which is Kearney's blue star. And if you're a gardener, you may be familiar with other types of Amsonia. And this one is native to a very particular place in Arizona in the Sonoran Desert. So we'll do Kearney's blue star. It's a very pretty, it's not an annual, it's a perennial. It's not quite a shrub, kind of in between, but it has beautiful light blue flowers. So that's a good choice. Another suggestion was devil's claw, which is Proboscidea parviflora, and there are a variety of different devil's claws. This is the one that's native to the Sonoran Desert. It has very pretty flowers, kind of an interesting growth form, interesting leaves, and it's one of those where the flower looks absolutely nothing like the seed pod, and it's famous for the seed pod. So if you are out in the desert and you look down and you see this plant and these pretty flowers, and you're like, oh, that's really nice. And then later on in the season, you'll see these, horrible, what they kind of stick onto your clothes. They're very large seed pods, and you just don't make the mental connection between the growing plant and the flower and this large, really kind of difficult seed pod. So that's a good choice. There's a lot of interesting forms there: the flowers, the leaves, and that amazing seed pod. So I had so many suggestions for the prickly pear, the agave, and all of that, that they're actually, many of the suggestions were the same. So I had to come up with a few to fill out this last 10 suggestions, and I chose a fern that is native to the Sonoran Desert. And people don't think of ferns in the desert, but they are there. There are moist areas and wetlands, and not surprisingly, this particular fern is a little prickly to protect itself. You see it in areas where it gets some shade. It grows in cracks and rocks. Usually I've seen it in like narrow little canyons where you have like little fissures and water can collect there. So it's called the spiny cliff break, and it's a pretty fern. It's one of those when it's really dry, it just sort of curls up and turns brown, and you think it's totally dead, but it's not. You get rain, you get some moisture, and it unfurls again and it turns green. So that is a beautiful little plant. So we'll be doing that one. And the last choice is the wolfberry, Lycium pallidum. And this is, one of those shrubs that doesn't look like a lot. It's kind of messy. It has a pale grayish green leaf, and they're kind of succulent leaves, very tiny. It has really lovely, very small lavender flowers, followed by very bright berries that have like a translucency to them. I just love them when I see them. Birds love them too. And it is related to the goji berry, which is native to China. But we do have our own version, and it's called the wolfberry. Not quite sure why wolfberry. Um, and it's one of those where even though the shrub, the plant itself, doesn't look too interesting, it has a lot of discrete characteristics that are really interesting. So I thought that would be a good one to choose. So the last 10, Opuntia, Cylindropuntia agave, Salvia quercus, Chiltepine, Amsonia kearnii, Kearney's blue star, uh, Proboscidium parviflora, which is devil's claw, spiny cliffbrake, which is a fern, and wolfberry. So those are the last 10. We'll add them to the first 10. And let's see, I have the list here. Sandpuff, pinon, eyelash grass, palo verde, claret cup, which is a cactus, creosote bush, coyote gourd, New Mexico thistle, and Arizona sycamore. So what I'm going to do, just to remind you, is we're doing all 20 of these. I'm going to be doing them kind of all at once, but you're not going to see all at once on the videos. I'm going to group them by growth form and maybe color palette, we'll see. And we're going to go with one basic pattern, which is my small one. And so here I have this pattern as a hummingbird. So it's a smaller body. Somebody asked, how big is it? It's about 12 inches tall as sort of a normal doll with a head. So these plants may be a little bit different because there may be something going on coming out of the upper body. So 12 inches is about the smallest you can go comfortably when you're working on things by hand and on the sewing machine. So it's a basic little body. It's kind of hippie, kind of big in the thighs and the hips. So it has some stability when it's sitting, which is really nice. It has all the button joints, kind of a long straight arm, and probably what I'm going to do is something different for the hands. We're not necessarily going to have hands on plants because plants don't have hands. Of course, they don't have bodies and arms and legs either, but we're going to take a little bit of artistic license with that. So the heads will be completely different, right? So it's not going to be the sort of thing where you have eyes and a mouth and ears or anything like that. But probably if I have something on top, it will have the button joint. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to look at each of these growth forms for these plants, and then I'm going to decide what changes I need to make in the shapes for these bodies for those plants, and I'll come up with some pattern adjustments. So what we'll do with the videos in 2021 is we'll be talking about the design process, what I'm thinking of each particular species, what I want the end result of the figure to be, and then changes that I need to make in the pattern. So the first part of any series of these videos in terms of groups of plants are going to be talking about design, color choices, perhaps techniques that I'm going to use for embellishment, things like that. So the bodies themselves, I want to keep as simple as possible. And then I have gone through my stash and I've chosen two fabrics that the majority of the bodies are going to be made out of. This is sort of a linen cotton. It's a thicker fabric, but it's not that thick. It has some texture. It's not as smooth as, say, a muslin or a quilting cotton would be. But if you have quilting cottons, it's a similar weight. It just has a little more texture, a little more defined weave. And it's kind of a light brown, I guess a lighter tobacco color is what a lot of people call it. This is a wool cotton blend that I found in my stash. and it's sort of a grayish, greenish beige, which is, kind of a blah color. But this is actually a great color to use for a lot of plants. As you look out, especially now in wintertime, you look out into nature and you see a lot of these two colors. We think of them as blah colors because they might not be colors that we want to wear, but nature has a lot of this. What I might do with half of this is dye it a little more green. So we'll see. So the bodies are going to be basically this. They're both lightweight, easy to sew, um, and relatively thin fabrics. I don't know if you can see here. And if I need more stability, I will talk about how I do that, because think about it, plants, they have a lot of things that stick out and stick up. And I prefer not to use a lot of wiring or doing anything weird there. So if I need more structure, we'll talk about that for the particular plants. So these are going to be the two main fabrics that you're going to see for the bodies. And of course, we'll be using other things for any clothing or embellishment that I will use. So the goal is to talk about the design, creating the new patterns to bring these plants to life as figures in cloth. And then as I go through this process, I will be thinking of how to create a simplified pattern for you if you want to try and make one of these species. So you will see the videos after I have completed everything, and I'm going to try and do these every couple of weeks or so, so that when I start talking about a particular plant or group of plants, those patterns might be available sooner rather than later. So that's where we are at this point. It's still December. I'm going to start thinking about sewing in the next couple of weeks. So hopefully I'll be posting another video probably after the holidays, and we'll start with our first group of plants. So until then, thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.